Now, you may be asking yourself, why, as we are just getting into FP, am I throwing in a topic that seems to diverge a bit from FP? Well, the SpreadRest syntax is used extensively with functional programming in JavaScript, and I'm going to be using it with the first FP example that we're going to look at next. So I want to make sure you understand it. And besides, this is one of my favorite additions to JavaScript in recent years, and it has become critical to the language. Now, we have already talked about in some of the earlier sections many JavaScript features that are used in functional programming. For example, these include concepts such as functions in JavaScript are first class and can be used as higher order functions, as well as arrow functions. Closure is an important concept in FP, and bind. Now, I'm going to add this SpreadRest syntax as another feature of JavaScript that is used extensively in functional programming. As you can tell by how I've been referring to the syntax SpreadRest, it has two names, spread and rest. The reason for this is it can be used in two different ways. I will first talk about the spread application and then what is referred to as rest. So first, spread syntax. Now, in both of these cases, both that I'm going to be talking about, it's the triple dots like this right here that is used to indicate spread or rest. So it's the same syntax, but they do different things depending on how they're used. So first, spread. Now, what this does is it allows an iterable, for example, an array, to be expanded into its individual elements so that each element can be dealt with separately, and we can address each element separately. Really, it's best when trying to explain how these things work to do it with examples. So let's get into that. I'm going to pull up Visual Studio Code here, and we'll just get started with some examples here. I'm going to start with something pretty basic. I'm going to create an array. Let's see, let's call it numbers, and it's just going to have, it's just going to have 3 numbers in it. That's all. Okay, so that's our array. Now let me show you something. What would happen if we do console.log and then we display this array using console.log, but we use the spread operator to display it? What are we going to see? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I'll save that. Let me just drop this down a bit so I can easily access. Reference error. I obviously did not enter the same thing in here. We'll try that again. So notice what we get. It displays the elements of that array as 3 separate things. It doesn't display it as an array like we'd get if we did console.log numbers. We would see an array here, but this, we get the 3 different elements. So it takes and spreads those out. That's the way I think of it. It spreads out the elements from that array so we can deal with the values separately. And that's what we're getting there. Now, let's look at another application really quick. Another thing we can do with this operator. So I've got a multiply function here that I'm going to set up, and basically what this does is it takes in 3 values and multiplies them together. Pretty simple. So let's go ahead and do that. A multiplied by B multiplied by C, and then it's going to return the results of that. Okay, now how would we go ahead and pass in this array and use the 3 values in this array to pass into this function here, so that 1 goes to A, 2 goes to B, and 3 goes to C? Well, we can do it with the spread operator, and it's done like this. Let's store the results here, multiply, and then when we pass it in the array, we just need to spread it out. And so I put the array there, I reference it, and then I use the spread operator to spread that out for us. And that should give us the results. So if I save that, let's just take a look at the results, and it's 6. 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 3 is 6. So that's working for us. So that's another way we can use the spread operator. Once again, we're spreading out those individual values so they get passed in as separate values. All right, let's look at another application. Let's say we have another array here, num2. Let's see, 3, we'll just put some numbers in this one as well. Okay, now if we wanted to combine these two arrays together, well, there are some methods on arrays that allow us to do that, but it can be done very simply with the spread operator. Let me show you. So here's the new array I'm setting up. We're going to set that equal to an array. Right there we have an array. Well, what values do we want to put in that array? Well, if we use the spread operator, then we can spread these out and it will put the individual elements, individual values inside of the square brackets and create a new array with those individual values. If we just put the name of the array, we're going to get an array of arrays. But if we use the spread operator to spread them out, that doesn't happen. So we'll do numbers and then spread operator for num2. All right, let's take a look at that. That is new array we want to look at. So if I type in new array there, we can see we got those values in the array, this new array that we created. All right, I want to talk for a minute about copying an array because this is one of the applications for the spread operator in FP. So let's say I wanted to create a copy of the numbers array. If I did it like this, what's going to happen? Well, it's certainly going to store something in this variable. But what gets stored there, the value that gets stored in this variable is actually a reference to this array. So this variable stores a value that references the array, and this one will store a value that references the array as well. So that causes a problem, because if we wanted to create a copy of this array so that I could change the copy array without affecting this one, that wouldn't happen. We would have a problem. Let me just show you. If I do copy array dot push and add the number 4 to it, let's take a look what's going to happen here. Okay, well, first look at the copy array, and that has the number 4 in it, so that worked for us. But what about the original array? What about numbers? That has it as well. Now, the reason that happened is because the value stored in both of those variables is simply a reference to the original array. So when we change it using copy array, we're referencing the same array that this one does. And so we change that array. This reference is pointing to the array that was changed. So that doesn't work for us. If we want to make a copy that we want to be able to change without affecting the original version, we need to do that differently. And there are different ways to do that. But the spread operator is the one I prefer. It makes it pretty simple to do. So here's the application. Basically what we want to do is copy array, and we're going to create a brand new array. What's going to be in that array? Well, it's going to be the values from the numbers array. And so by creating that brand new array, spreading out the values from the numbers array, we get the same elements in this new array, but it does not reference the same array because we've created a new array by putting these square brackets around it. Okay, so we've spread those out inside this new array. Now when we push forward to it, we're not going to mutate, I should say mutate this array here. Let's take a look at that. So if we look at copy array, that's got the 4. Numbers, that doesn't. And so that works for us. And that's a pretty common application when we're dealing with objects in FP. Now, this not only works for arrays, it'll work for regular objects as well. Let me just show you that really quick. So if I set up, just a simple object here, see, name, and then favorite number, let's put that, 32 is my favorite number. So that's going to create an object there. And if we wanted to get a new object, if we were to go obj equals obj, or new obj equals obj, we'd have the same problem that we did when we tried to copy the numbers array. It would put a value in here that references this object, just like the value in this variable references the same object. So if we made a change to it, well, it would show up with either variable. We would see that change with either variable because they're pointing to the same object. So the way we do it, put the curly braces around it, and then we use the spread operator. And that way, that will go ahead and create a new object for us. So now if I make a change by adding a new property, the new obj, as we can see, has that new property. But what about the original one? It does not. And so it works just as well for doing that. All right, now we need to quickly talk about the second application of this syntax, the REST application. That's referred to as REST. In many ways, this is the opposite of the spread syntax. So instead of spreading out the elements, instead of expanding those elements, it combines or condenses the elements into an array. So let's look at an example where that would be important. So let's say we want to be able to set up a function where we can call it a sum function, and we can pass in any number of numbers. We don't know how many we're going to pass in. We're going to pass in some number of them, and it should take and add all those together. Well, how would we deal with this? How would we create a function that no matter how many arguments are included, we can deal with them? Well, the traditional way of doing that has been with the arguments property of functions. And you may have used that in the past. Let me just show you that really quick. So if we have a sum function, I'm just going to log to the console arguments. This is a property of functions, and it allows us to get all the arguments we're passing that function. So if I save that, we can see the arguments shown here, and they're stored like an array. This is not an array, it's array-like. And so we can see that 0 position has 5, 6, 9, and 10. We can see that those are passed in, and we could access those. And that's been the traditional way of dealing with that. But a more effective way and an easier way is using the REST operator. And the reason that is better in a lot of cases, let me show you. Let's say this was a arrow function. Whoops. And we were doing console.log arguments. All right, let me comment out this one so we don't get an error because I've declared too many functions. But notice what? We still get an error. Uncaught reference error. Arguments is not defined. So arguments is no longer valid with arrow functions. And we do use a lot of arrow functions in functional programming. So arguments just is not helpful at this point. But here's what we can do. We can use the REST operator. Let's say we want to assign everything that's passed in to an array called args. Well, the REST operator used in this situation, it's going to accept whatever is passed in. It's going to combine those into an array. And now I'm just going to log those out. I can just log those out and we can see what that is. So if I save that, notice we have an array, and it is an array. It's not array-like, it really is an array. So then we could begin to deal with each of those arguments as we needed to. So basically, spread and REST, they're the opposite of each other. Spread is used more extensively. You'll see that used more extensively, but don't forget the application of REST, like this situation I just talked about. It can be very important. All right, that was quite a long tutorial, but now we're ready to jump into our first application of FP. So let's get to it.